Well, as we've been studying through the birth of Jesus, Paul picks up that theme in Philippians and says, let this mindset be in you that was also in Christ Jesus, that he left the heavenly abode and humbled himself to become a child. So today we're going to take a one-off from the book of Luke, and we're actually going to have a special guest speaker with us. And Ron Deal is going to be talking today about marriage and how that mindset of what Christ did in the nativity and the crucifixion is the secret to every relationship that we have. So can we give a warm Horizon welcome to Ron Deal being with us today. Ron, thanks for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad. Thank you. Well, good morning, church. How are you today? It's great to be with you today. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be a part of this church for the weekend. Let's start by talking about making family work. Does anybody know why we put wedding rings on that finger? You even stop to think about that? I mean, some of us are married in here. Some of us have seen a wedding in here. Some of us have heard about a wedding. And they always put the ring finger or the wedding ring on that finger. Why not the thumb? Why not the right hand finger? Does anybody know why we do that? It's connected to the heart, right? So there's this old romantic notion that says there's this vein that runs right up that finger, only that finger, runs right up your arm and straight into your heart. It's not true. But it's a really nice notion, right? The Chinese actually historically have this great explanation for why we put wedding rings on this finger. It's a little finger play. Everybody join me. Put your thumbs together like this. Your pointer finger up like this. This is a little like that thing you did when you were a kid. Here's the church, here's the steeple, open the doors. Where's all the people? Across the street, there's a bar, open the doors, there they are. You didn't do it that way? I'm not from Cincinnati, obviously I got it wrong. So, okay, thumbs together, pointer finger up, middle finger is bent like this, bumping up against the other one. Now ring finger, this is a little hard. Come on, everybody join me on this. And then pinky goes like this. You really got to feel it, all right? That's a little difficult to manage, but don't hurt yourself. Hopefully not going to strain any tendons or anything. But here's what the Chinese say. There's a reason we put ring fingers on that finger. They say your thumbs represent you and your parents. You have a bonded, connected relationship, but as life would have it, there should be space in our relationship with our parents. But we're connected, but there's space, right? Pointer finger, that's you and your siblings if you have them. Bonded, connected, space. Jump down to the pinky finger. That's you and your children if you have them. Bonded, connected, space. If we do our job right, they grow up. That's what they do. They grow up and go away. That's right. And then there's that, And then there's that ring finger, right? That's the bonded, connected to your spouse. That's that finger. Go ahead, pull it apart. Like, you can't do it. And if you can, there's something wrong with you, you know? Yeah, see, there's not meant to be any space in that covenantal, lifelong relationship. Well, that's kind of cool. I actually like that explanation. But I want to suggest to you this morning they missed something. They missed the attitude that makes this whole thing work. The ingredient that makes this whole thing work is not a part of the explanation. And I want to take some time this morning to help you understand what that attitude is and why it makes such a huge difference in intimate, close, personal relationships, and how it can empower you and me to love well. Because after all, that's what we want to do with family relationships, right? We want to love well. Friendships that are people that are close to us, that matter to us. We want to love them well. Our children, we want to love them well. Our parents, our siblings. Our most intimate relationships, we want to be successful. That's why we engage in those relationships. And yet, somehow, it's a bit of a mystery still to us. Why we can't quite make it work the way we want it to work. And sometimes we find it difficult to make love happen the way we want. We intend for it to happen well. So what gets in the way? Well, maybe it comes down to this. We need to have the attitude that Christ had. Let's read from Philippians chapter 2. We just heard a little of this passage. I want to spend a little time reading the first 11 verses from the New Living Translation. Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy, Paul says, by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. And you could just pause and say, yeah, that's what we want. That's what we're after. Now, how do we do that? He continues, verse 3, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others, too. You must have the same attitude that Christ had. Here it is. What's the attitude? Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privilege. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. And when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the highest honor and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the God the Father. To love each other well, Paul says, take on the attitude of Christ. Be humble. Think of others first. Look out for their interests, not just your own interests. Don't relish your power or your position or all the prestige. Jesus had all of that. He's God, for crying out loud. He's the creator of the universe. He held it all in the palm of his hand and he gave it up to become obedient to death, even death on a cross. Don't relish your power and your position. Use it to help others. That's what Jesus did, and that's what we're called to do. Be humble. What is it about this thing called humility? How does it have the power to empower us to love other people well, like Jesus has loved us well? Well, let's talk about this thing, humility, for a minute. It has two components. It has a vertical component, and it has a horizontal component. It's really fascinating how the scriptures really flesh this out for us. Jesus defines humility well a couple of times in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5. One of the things he says is, blessed are the poor in spirit. Poor in spirit doesn't mean you're poor, economically poor. It doesn't mean that you have poor self-esteem. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you're not spiritually proud. Okay? Pride, if I were to put it in everyday vernacular, pride is simply, oh, I got this. It's that attitude that says, I am self-sufficient. I am independent from God. I don't need him. I don't need his help. I got this. But humility says, I so don't got this. I am not self-sufficient. I don't live independently of God. I can't make up my own rules. I don't got this. Charles Bridges says that pride is contending for supremacy with God. And just to hear that, it's like, I'm saying I'm like up there with you, God. I can do what I want. But humility is dependence on God. Humility is not thinking poorly of yourself. It's thinking rightly about yourself. It's where you stand at the foot of the cross. It's where you stand before a magnificent God and you go, oh, I so am not him. I know exactly who I am. It doesn't mean that I'm a worm and I'm pathetic. It just means I'm not him. I know my place. I think rightly about myself. Adam and Eve is a really good example of the humility and the pride component, right? Just think for a minute. So they're walking around the garden together in full unity with God. Everything is perfect in the beginning. They have complete humility, if you will, in terms of being dependent upon God. And then one day they make the decision, you know what? He's got his way. We've got ours. I think we can act independently of him. That's the first moment of pride. And the next thing you know, they're taking a bite of a fruit that he said don't. Yeah, but we think we can. And besides, we want to be like you. We want to know what you know. We want to contend for supremacy with God. And after that moment, the world has never been the same. Well, just like there's a vertical component to pride, there is a horizontal component to pride. Jesus talks about this in the New Testament as well. It's the language of love your neighbor as yourself. That's essentially what this language is count others as more significant than yourself. It's the way Paul puts it in Philippians chapter 2. Mark chapter 10, there's a great little story where James and John are having this little argument over who gets to be number 2 guy and number 3 guy when Jesus comes into his power. Their perspective was, Jesus has come here, he's going to set up an earthly kingdom, he's going to right all the wrongs, he's going to restore Israel back to a place of supremacy in the world. And when that happens, Jesus, hey, can we be your right-hand guy and your left-hand guy? We want to be number 2 and number 3 in the power structure. And they're having a little argument around this. And by the way, when the other 10 disciples, the apostles, notice what's going on, they get indignant. They get angry with those 2 guys, because you could just imagine them going, oh, man, I wanted to be number 2. And they've already jumped the gun, and here they are talking to Jesus about it. But Jesus comes, his answer to James and John is this: whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. In other words, in my kingdom, it doesn't work that way. People who are trying to find power are going to lose it. People who give up their power are going to find it. Whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man, he says, even I didn't come to be served. I came to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. True greatness, Jesus redefines greatness. He says true greatness is serving others for the glory of God, not your own personal glory. Be humble. Think of others first. Don't use your power or your position for yourself. Use it to serve others. If vertical pride is contending for supremacy with God, horizontal pride is contending for supremacy with your neighbor, with this person that you love, with this person you're trying to be family with. Now notice, when this triangle is ordered, then our relationships are ordered. And it's humility that keeps this thing ordered. When we come before God and think rightly of ourselves, we bow before Him, and He is God and we aren't. And when we come before one another with the same attitude, serving others rather than serving ourselves, it keeps our relationships ordered and things are intact. But when pride enters the picture, either vertically or horizontally, everything gets out of whack. All of a sudden, things change. And it's a significant change. See, pride and humility affect our relationships very differently. Let's look a little closer at this. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5 is a passage where it's talking to leaders in the church and the people following them. It's talking to elders and the men of the church that are supposed to be following the leadership of those elders. But the principle applies really to all relationships. Let's read it. Clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. By the way, the New Living Translation says, dress yourselves in humility. I love that imagery, right? You got dressed this morning, you went to your closet, you picked out some clothes you wanted to put on, and you got yourself dressed. In the same way, you can choose to put on humility. Now, watch this. Clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. Is this horizontal or is this vertical? Horizontal, right? He's talking about relationships here on earth. Because, now if you're like me, you pause right there and you go, okay, he's talking horizontal and he's given a because. The because will be a horizontal answer. But no, he goes vertical. Why? Because vertical is always connected to the horizontal and horizontal is always connected to the vertical. Those two things are very intertwined in our understanding of relationships and how they work. So watch this. Clothe yourselves with humility toward one another because God, he went vertical, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Wait a minute. Why did he do that? Because the vertical and the horizontal are always intertwined. And besides, we're made in the image of God, and what works in our relationship with God vertically works in our relationships with one another horizontally. Listen to the power of this principle. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Now, this little phrase is used in multiple ways, in slight variations throughout the Old and the New Testament. Let me just give you a quick sampling of some of the passages. James chapter 4, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God, right? That's the only thing we should do. When you see yourself correctly in light of who God is, you submit yourself to God. Philippians 2, the passage we just read, talked about Jesus even did this. This dynamic worked in Jesus' life too. He humbled himself and became obedient to death. Therefore, God exalted him. We'll come back to that in a minute. God exalts him. God gave him grace, if that's one way we could say that. The Old Testament, Proverbs 3 says, God mocks proud mockers, but gives grace to the humble. Proverbs chapter 11 says, pride leads to disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. Proverbs 29 says, a man's pride will bring him low, but a humble spirit will obtain honor. Micah in the Old Testament, the minor prophet, kind of sums up all the other minor prophets, Amos and Hosea and Isaiah. And he says, so what does the Lord require of you? And it's kind of the summary statement of all of those prophets that have been talking to the nation of Israel. What does God really want from you? He wants three things. He wants you to act justly, right? Like things that are correct, that are proper, that are just. Love mercy. Be people that love mercy and just walk humbly with your God. See, we come to God in faith in a moment of humility when we say, I so don't got this. I need you, God, to rescue me from me. And then we walk with God in humility throughout our lifetime, and eventually every knee is going to bow in heaven and on earth somehow when Christ comes again. You can either choose to bow the knee of humility before Christ shows up, or it's going to be done to you. You get to choose. I suggest the former rather than the latter, if you know what I mean. So we come to Christ in humility, we walk with Christ in humility, and what do we get for that? Grace. He covers us with grace. Okay, now we normally just stop the conversation about humility right there. We just kind of say, yeah, it's a virtue, it's a really good thing, we should do it. But what I want you to see in this passage in 1 Peter 5 and throughout all the other passages is the relational dynamic that gets into play when we act in humility toward one another. Now let's watch this. There's a paradox. I'm going to call it the humility paradox. And it's simply this. When we bow, God lifts. When we bow, God lifts. In Matthew 23, again, Jesus repeats the principle, but he shows you the relational impact of it. When he says he's confronting the pride of the Pharisees who love to be in places of honor, they want to be noticed and they want to be in power positions and prestige. And Jesus says, whoever exalts himself will be humbled. There it is. God opposes pride. And then Jesus says, whoever humbles himself will be exalted, but he has grace for those who are humble. Even the Father did this for Jesus. Philippians chapter 2. Jesus humbled himself, therefore God exalted his name above all the names. That's the dynamic in the relationship. When we bow our heart in humility, he elevates us. But there's also a pride paradox that we have to be aware of. And that is, if we exalt ourselves, God will oppose us. He will humble us. Proverbs 16 says, everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured, it says, he will not go unpunished. I can give you a prescription right now. It's really very simple. To either have God on your side, working on your behalf, lifting you up, helping you to be more than you could ever be all by yourself, or to have God against you. You can walk out of this room today with humility on your heart, constantly reminding yourself who God is and who you're not, and that you need him and you're dependent on him, and you're going to live according to his statutes and his commands because you love him and for who he is, and he will have grace. Or you can walk out of here and you go, church, God, I got this. And you will find life opposing you. It's the way it works. The relational dynamic is very, very powerful. We saw it with Adam and Eve. We can think of many, many more examples. In fact, it's pretty much every story of the Bible is people either coming to God in humility and finding grace, or coming to him in pride and not. David is another good example in the Old Testament. Here's a guy, he was lowly in heart, he was a nobody, and God said, I want him to be the next king. Why? Because humility just described who he was. He was strong, he was powerful, but he wasn't always seeking himself. He was taking care of other people. He was doing the lowly jobs of being a shepherd. And God stores him, or puts him into a place of being the king. And sure enough, he gets to be king, and he starts looking around going, I'm king. You know what? I can do what I want. I like this power stuff. I can be who I want, do what I want, say what I want. Next thing you know, he's having an affair with Bathsheba. He kills her husband. And what does God do? God opposes him. He sends a guy named Nathan, a prophet, to go and confront David and say, look, you can't do this. And David says, oh, you're right. And he recognizes his sin in that moment. Are there consequences? Yeah, the child that Bathsheba was pregnant with dies as a result of this. But David goes back to a heart of humility again. And so what happens? Does God just squash him? No, because he goes back to a contrite, broken heart. God restores him back to his place as king, and life goes on because David is making sure now people are following God. There's a guy in the New Testament. His first name is Saul. His second name is Paul. When he's Saul, he's walking around going, I so got this. You Christians, you're not right. I know what the truth is. And next thing you know, he's throwing people in jail and he's standing by as people are being killed. And what does God do? He opposes him. On the road to Damascus in a pretty dramatic way. He blinds him. He gets his attention. And all of a sudden, Saul is listening for the very first time. He's not just contending for supremacy with God. He's now listening, and his heart is humbled. And what happens? God drops the scales from his eyes and gives him a new name. And the next thing you know, his name is Paul. And he's writing most of the New Testament. Changing the world on behalf of God because his heart has been changed. This is true over and over and over and over and over. God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. Now, hang on, because here's the really cool thing. What works vertically works horizontally. That's why in 1 Peter 5:5, he says, here's the principle, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because the same principle that works between you and God also works in human relationships. You see, there's a parallel in our marriage and family relationships. God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble, and so do spouses. So do coworkers. So do children. So do parents. So do friends. Approach anybody in your world with a pride in your heart about who you are compared to who they are, and you will find you're in conflict with them. They will oppose you. There will be subtleties that make your relationship tense and difficult. You will find it doesn't work well. This works in all levels of society, but let's just start by thinking about marriage just for a minute. Some of you have been to marriage classes where you've learned communication skills and you've learned how to, manage conflict better. And for years, I taught people those skills. And then I was kind of mystified by some couples would never use it. It's like they could practice it, they could get it. I could watch them do it. They would walk out of the room and never use it. When the chips were down and life was real and they were at home and the conflict arose, they would never speak to their wife in a compassionate manner. They would never listen to their husband in ways that they had practiced, that they know how to do. It was not a skill deficit. They just couldn't get there. Why? I finally figured it out. Because pride won't let you use the skills you already have. It undoes everything. It just invites opposition from the other person, and it sets you onto a course of a cycle of conflict rather than softening the moment and allowing both of you to own who you are and find each other and figure out how to love well. You just won't even use the skills. Blame in marriage, right? We're all good at that. We're noticing what the other person does that really irritates us. We don't notice our part of it, of course. But that's irrelevant, right? Because they're the one who needs to change, right? Adam and Eve did this. As soon as sin enters the world and God confronts them, he opposes them. What happens? They start blaming one another and just passing the buck. Right? Is that helpful? No. And why can't we see our part of the dance in our marriage relationship? Because pride blinds you. Pride blinds you. It's like Saul on the road to Damascus. He's blinded to what he's doing to God, and so God blinds him so he can begin to see correctly. Pride blinds you to you. You can't see you. Let me give you 4 little snapshots out of my own marriage to make this point. Year 1. Nan and I have been married for 31 years at this point. Year 1, we're like all couples trying to figure out how to sleep in the same bed together. You know what I mean? Like, I'd never done that with anybody before. She hadn't either. And so you got to figure out how to sleep together. Well, she is a cocooner. God help me. I don't even understand how people do this. But somehow she can kind of do this thing, and the covers are tucked here, and the covers are tucked there, and she just makes this nice little warm cocoon, and that's where she sleeps really well. Well, I'm one of those guys where one leg's hanging off the bed, and one leg's on top of the covers, and I need one sheet at night, even in the wintertime, and she needs blankets in the summertime, right? We are really different. when it comes to this kind of stuff. And so within the first few weeks of being married, I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and all the covers would be off. I didn't even have my one sheet. I was cold. Why? Because she had cocooned and everything was on her side. And I remember waking up at 3 a.m. and this thought came to my mind. She is so selfish. Man, I know she's asleep, but I didn't give her any mercy over that. You know what I mean? So I did what made sense to me. I kind of reached over carefully, grabbed the covers, and yanked really hard. And of course, she, and then I would lay there like I was asleep, like nothing ever happened, just in case she woke up and was looking like, what? And I was sound asleep, didn't move, didn't say anything, because, I had to let her know that's not the right way to do this. Question, what did Ron learn about Nan? I learned she was selfish. Question number 2, what did Ron learn about Ron? Nothing. Snapshot number 2. It's now year 10 in our marriage. My car was in the shop, so she was going to drive me to work, drop me off, and then go on her way, drop off kids, school, go to work. I get in the passenger seat. She's driving. We get 2 blocks down the road, and I begin to notice, you can just kind of read body language like she's nervous. Like I'm noticing she's nervous. And so I'm like, hey, what's on your mind? Fiddling with some stuff, and she goes, oh, nothing. And I'm like, I know what that means, right? No, what's going on? Well, I pressed her, and then she finally found the courage, and she told me. She was driving, but she knew what was going to happen. Once you get in this lane, at this time of day, it's better if you go left instead of going straight. The traffic's a whole lot less. If you I'm sorry, would you get around this person? Why are we going so slow? Can we get going here? She knew I was in the passenger seat, but I was going to drive. See, parenthetically, what I need to explain to everybody is what I know that all the men in the room know that she didn't know. And that's when you're driving from point A to point B, you're trying to get there as quickly as you can and beat your record from last week, the world record that you set. And you want to get around this guy going beside you because you can't let them beat you, even though they're not going to the same place you are. But that's irrelevant. She didn't understand this. You see, I had to help her with that. Question, what did Ron learn about Ron? Well, I was a little taken back by, I do that sort of thing, don't I? And so I would say I went one layer down and I realized that I made her anxious at times when I really shouldn't do that. And if I understand Ephesians 5 right, my job is to make her more, not less. And I was making her less in that moment. So I needed to stop that, work on that. Did I learn anything else? Nope. Snapshot number 3. It's now year 14 in our marriage. I'm in graduate school studying marriage and family therapy, which meant I knew everything. Except my wife didn't know that I knew everything, so I had to help her with that. So one day I'm in the living room and I'm reading a book about relationships. And in walks my wife from a long day at work. She was a kindergarten teacher, had a hard day. Walks in, we say hello. She goes in the kitchen. Starts work on dinner. She starts telling me about her day. She's talking from the kitchen. I'm in the living room reading. She's talking about a hard day she had, a parent that came in, frustration, principal had to get involved. She says something about how it went down, and I, from the living room in front of my book, say, oh, honey, oh, babe, whenever you have an angry parent, why don't you try this great communication skill I just learned last week? I think you'll find that things go a whole lot better if you'll just do this. Funny thing a little happened. She kind of stopped talking, went curt. Pots and pans in the other room. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, there's that selfishness again. People pay good money for this sort of advice. She's getting it for free. And here she is. You think I like telling these stories? They're true. They're true. Question, what did Ron learn about Ron? Not much. Year 20. We've just been in Oklahoma City for Thanksgiving. All my family has descended from the Midwest and the South, and we've all kind of come together. We lived in Amarillo, Texas at the time, and we've just spent 4 days together as a family, multiple generations. And we're in the car, we're driving in the minivan back to Amarillo. I'm driving, Nan's in the passenger seat, kids are in the back, and I'm just talking. I'm like, man, did you notice everything I noticed? I don't know why, I've never noticed this before, but it was crazy. Did you notice the way everybody was like correcting each other and talking over each other all the time? Like my sister, corrected my brother. He was telling a story. She wasn't even there. She corrected him on the details. What's up with that? Like it was Tuesday and she said, no, it was Monday. You weren't even there. And it's irrelevant to the story. Why are you even picking that out? I don't even know why she did that. And my mom was like giving me advice. Here we are playing this board game and, she's giving me advice. And Ron, why did you make that play instead of this play? We're on the same team. You think strategy here, Ron. And I'm like, oh gosh, it's a game for crying out loud. And I'm just pouring all of this out. And I say to my wife, have you ever noticed this before? From the passenger seat, out of the corner of my eye, I catch her doing this. Are you kidding me? I've been telling you this for 20 years. 20 years? Really? 20 years? Wow. Wonder why I haven't ever noticed it before. Because pride blinds you to yourself. Question, what did Ron learn about Ron? I started thinking, do I do this to her? Oh my gosh. Year 1, the covers, I'm right, she's wrong and selfish, I got to correct her. Year 10 in the car, oh no, that's what I do. I coach. That's what my family does. We've done this forever. It's like who I am. It's in me. It's deep within who I am as a person. I just have this habit of I'm entitled to tell people when they're wrong. And they should be happy when I'm telling them they're wrong. And in fact, they should thank me for telling them that they're wrong. And my advice is the best advice. You're 14 in graduate school and I'm studying family therapy and I'm not even doing it on myself. You're 20 and I realize I've been doing this to her for 20 years. Pride blinds you to yourself. And then I start trying to figure out what humility looks like. And so how do I do this? And how do I own who I am? And I'm so sorry. And now I've learned, even at year 31, I am still, since year 20, I am still saying things to her like, I'm so sorry. You know what? I realize I have this ability to try to make you feel small, like I know and you don't. And I really don't want to do that right now. I do have something I need to share with you. Can we talk about that? I've learned I have to preface things now because I have so trained her to be paranoid. And that's on me. I've created a fear in her heart that I have to outlive now. I have to undo that now in humility, which means I have to own me over and over and over and over and over. And then I discovered that humility changes the whole dynamic because in inviting opposition, pride always invited opposition from her. Now when I do that sort of thing, all of a sudden she softens, her heart gets open, she's more forgiving. It de-escalates our conflict. We work through things so much more quickly than we used to. And all of a sudden we have a completely different relationship. And I'm empowered to love. And she gets empowered to love. Okay, go back to this. See, here's the thing that they miss. Go back, put your fingers together, right? That middle finger is bent, and that's the key to this whole thing. That's what the Chinese really missed in their explanation. The key that makes this whole ring finger thing work is that finger we didn't talk about, the one that's bowed. See, if you bow the knee of humility toward God vertically and toward one another horizontally, you can't pull apart your ring finger. But go ahead, everybody stand up in pride, and all of a sudden you can. It makes our most intimate, loving relationships, the ones that we want to have, more fragile. But watch. Here's the cool thing. You can go back to humility and everything gets solid again. It starts with me. Now, folks, this principle works in every relationship on the planet. Because it works vertically, we're made in the image of God. It works horizontally, all right? It works with a friendship. You ever had a friend who it was all about them? It's always on their time. You can't be late, but they can. And you're going to go to their restaurant, and it's always same on a one-sided relationship, and they know and you don't. What do you find rising up inside you towards that friend? No, thank you. I don't need any more of you. It's called opposition. Anybody here ever seen anybody in politics have a little pride, a little arrogance? Anybody ever seen that anywhere? Let's just take one example. How about somebody who gets caught doing something illegal and they go on TV and they're like, no, it wasn't me, and they're blaming and they're pointing fingers and it's not me, I don't understand why this is a big deal, would you guys just get off of this? What rises up inside you? Get him out, we're done. That guy's doesn't, he shouldn't serve, he shouldn't have any of that position. It's called opposition. But what happens if somebody gets caught with their hand in the kitty, goes on TV and they say, you know what, I'm so sorry, and they're broken about it, and they're sad about it, and they're hurting over it, and you can see that this is genuine. They're not just playing us, that this is genuine. And you look into that. Is that real remorse? Yes, I think it is brokenness and contrite. So what rises up inside of you? Well, they ought to be held accountable, but maybe we give them another chance. It's called grace. Humility invites grace. How many of you ever had a teenager in your life, right? You ever had a teenager in your world and it's never their fault? That little scratch on the car, not my fault, Dad. I'm sorry, not my fault. Can't get the chores done, can't get to school on time, not my fault. What rises up inside you as a parent? The same thing probably that happens to me. I'm like, oh, okay, you don't even have to go to school. I'll do your homework for you. No! What rises up is opposition, right? Don't you find yourself going, wait a minute, kid. No, you're going to listen to me. You get up on your toes a little bit. You get a little louder. You get a little more sterner. It's called opposition. But if that child, kids, here's a hint. If that child has a heart of humility and respect and openness to you and they own their mistakes, what do? It's okay. Come here. You're the biggest fan. You love all over him. There's grace. How about a boss? Anybody ever had a boss who was arrogant and had all the answers and didn't listen to anybody and was top down? What happens throughout the company? Talk at the water cooler. Don't want to hang around that person. Oh my goodness, I can't stand them. It's called opposition. This happens at every level of society. Pride begets opposition. Humility invites grace. So how do we put on humility? Let's walk through 5 things I just want to suggest to you today that you can hold on to. Choices that you can make, because we're going back to the language of 1 Peter 5:5. Clothe yourself. Put that jacket on. Put that humility on. And make a decision to be humble. 5 ways to do that. Number 1, take credit, but don't seek the glory. Take credit. When you do good stuff, take credit. But don't seek the glory. In our world today, everybody wants to beat their chest and they want to say, look at me, look at me. We even have songs, watch me, watch me. It's all about, hey, I'm the center of the universe and you need to figure that out. Don't be that person. If you do something good, take credit for that. But then immediately deflect all of the glory back to God. On the football field, it looks like somebody pointing to the heavens, just in that little moment where they say, I thank God for what he's done for me. In real life, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just grateful God's given me the talent and ability to be here and do what I do. You could say that in a one-on-one. It doesn't have to be on TV. Deflect it. Let him have the glory. Isn't that what Philippians 2 says? Jesus humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted his name above all the other names for the glory of the Father. Let's do the same thing. Number 2, serve others. Just like Jesus did, give yourself away. Any moment you can find to give yourself away reminds you who you are before a loving God and shows them that you think of them more highly than yourself. And the really beautiful moments, this happens anywhere and everywhere, but it really is beautiful when no one's watching and no one has a clue that you're serving somebody. Maybe a lowly person, maybe somebody who is in high need, or maybe it's just anybody, but nobody's watching. That's clothing yourselves with humility. Number 3, have the courage to look in the mirror. Have the courage to look in the mirror. You know what? This is exactly what courage is the right word. At year 20, it was a really, really hard, sad, depressing season of my life. Because I started looking deeply into the mirror and recognizing that even though I had good intentions, throughout all 20 of those years, good intentions don't mean loving well. I had to look in the mirror and recognize that the way I was going about those good intentions was prideful at its core. It was about me, not about her. That was hard. By the way, just a little sidebar here. I felt greatly ashamed of that part of me. One of the insidious things about what Satan does with shame is that he puts it in our heart and makes us think poorly of ourselves. Instead of being poor in spirit, thinking rightly about ourselves, we just think poorly of ourselves. And then we get embarrassed, and then we go inward, we get depressed, and we stop living and stop loving because I'm pathetic. That's what shame does to us. But you know what the solution to shame is? It's very interesting. For the last 10 years, there's been a lot of secular world science around shame and the brain and how it all ties together and how our mind-body neurology works. And one of the core things that comes out of that is vulnerability is what heals shame. When I have the courage to recognize what's not great in me and I own that outwardly, I say it out loud, maybe to my wife, maybe to my children, I blew it. I am so sorry. I need to apologize to you. The act of confession. Oh, there it is. See, God's been talking about this for a really long time. Confession heals shame. Confession is an act of humility. Humility rightly orders our relationships. Number 4, if you don't have the courage to look in the mirror, you can't take the log out of your own eye. But we need to start by taking the log out of our own eye. Matthew chapter 7, Jesus describes again this cycle we're talking about. God opposes the proud, and so do earthly relationships. Jesus kind of shares it in a different way in Matthew 7 where he says, don't judge other people because you're a hypocrite in that moment. You're condemning them for something you're probably guilty of. And you're standing in pride going, oh, I'm so much better than these other people. And he says, watch what happens. For with the judgment you give, you will be judged. You see, they will oppose you. It will come right back. And now we just have this negative cycle of judgment. That's why a lot of marriages fall down. That's why a lot of parent-child relationships fall apart. Don't do that, he says. You're so focused on the speck in their eye, you're not noticing what? There's a big log in your eye. Would you take the log out of your eye first? Then you can be an asset to the person you're trying to love, but not until then. So have the courage to look in the mirror, see who you are, and then own who you are. You deal with you first. Deal with them second. Long after you have tried to get your heart in the right place. And then number 5, make sure you get the vertical right. Worship. Yes, corporately, what we're doing here today, worship. But each and every day as you walk through life, just remember who God is, moment to moment, recognizing who He is in your world and your life. And out of a heart of gratitude, worship Him. Every moment you can, be mindful of Him, worship. Because why? Because that reminds you who you are. It helps you to be poor in spirit, not thinking poorly of yourself, thinking rightly of yourself. Stand next to the cross and look at His magnificence on a regular basis. Recognize what Christ did, what empowered Him to love us well, and how grateful we are for that. When we recognize His grace and His mercy, we get honest about who we are. I so don't got this. I so need Him. And if we do that daily, vertically, it'll help us horizontally love others. You want to love well. I know you do. That's your intent. How do we do it? Here's how we do it. In humility, consider others more significant than yourself. You know, not long after that conversation in the minivan at year 20, this whole thing came to a head for me and for my wife and I, and we went and sat down with a counselor who helped us kind of deal with ourselves a whole lot differently and work on some things in our relationship. And I've been walking out this humility shift ever since. Talking about it, teaching about it. It's changed how I do counseling. It's changed my leadership style. It's changed how I try to love my wife and my kids. And I think it's going to be the rest of my life, just walking this thing out. But what I noticed, there was a moment there early on when we were really in the thick of it, trying to figure this stuff out. And I came to my wife one day and I said, you know what, honey, I really had good intentions, but now I see what I was doing to you all this time. And what I don't understand is, when did it all begin to be about me? When did I stop thinking of you and considering God, but just made it about me? And if you asked her today, she will tell you that that's the moment she knew she got her husband back. Her heart immediately softened in grace. Immediately she was more prone to forgiveness. Why? Because I was dealing with me, and she could see that clearly and plainly, and it changed everything. And every single day I wake up, I have the same choice you do. What am I going to put on today? Am I going to put on pride? Or am I going to put on humility? Walk humbly with my God and love others well. Let's pray. God in heaven, I want to thank you for this morning, and thank you for the reminder, the gentle reminder this morning of how great your love is for us and how you have given up so much to love us. We stand in awe of that, and we worship you. Would you please help us as we endeavor to love others as you have loved us, so we can make family work. In the name of Jesus I pray. Amen.
Amen. Can we thank Ron for being here today? Thank you, Ron. If you are interested in some of Ron's material across from the fireplace, there's a book table set up there that you can get information from his different books on marriage and family. He is also a blended family expert, and so he's going to be talking tonight. We're going to have a workshop for anyone who's dealing with blended family issues. So that's going to be workshop style, so you can bring any questions you have. If you'd like to sign up for that workshop, feel free to come tonight. The information's on your program. You can read that, come tonight, and really ask the questions you have, whether you're in a blended family or you've got a divorce in your family of a brother or a sister-in-law, and you're trying to figure out what role do I play, how do we go through this. Ron's going to be doing a whole workshop tonight on that. So thanks for being here. We'll see you next week as we continue the series on the book of Luke. Thanks again.